Chapter 14. The Manor. Just before the road from the inn turns and makes for the village, there is a hidden path to the manor. Visitors use the main manor, crossing through the gatehouse and past the apple trees and the stable. Some of the villagers know about the path, but few use it, for it passes too close to the dark woods. Alice, in her comings and goings through the village, had come upon the path, although she had never before had needed to follow it all the way up to the manor, until one afternoon when golden yellow blossoms first appeared on the laburnum trees and Girdle the cow gave birth to her first calf, a sweet and sticky thing Alice thought to call Rosebud, for she was as red as the hedgerows near the village church. As she watched Girdle nuzzle and suckle Rosebud and tuck her against her warm body to give the calf her warmth, Alice was filled with a sudden longing to go to the boy Edward at the manor and see for herself that he was there, fed and dry and content. Mayhap he was unhappy and longing for her, and she would bring him back to the inn and take care of him, as Girdle did Rosebud. For days she thought about this, and the more she thought, the righter it seemed. She imagined Edward's first sight of her at the manor. "Alice, you have not forgot me," he would cry, throwing his arms about her waist. "Have you come to take me away? I pray you have, for I am desolate here without you. As well am starving and beaten and forced to sleep outside in the snow, and no one care for me." She would scoop the boy up in her arms, and they would go together back to the inn, and Alice would take care of Edward, and this would make her heart content. All she needed was Edward, and all would be well. She was certain of it. So one day, when Janet had gone to the market fair at Edenwick to buy a copper pot, a young pig, and a bit of lace for her best kirtle, and no guest but Magister Reese cluttered the table, Alice put the cat in the stable so that he would not follow her, and the sun, warming her wintry spirit, climbed to the manor on its gray-green hill. Passing the village field, she saw Roger Mustard and Thomas the Stutterer swinging their weed hooks and felt the familiar feelings in her chest and her throat, but turned her eyes away so she would not have to think about what she had had and what she had lost. The manor was bustling in the sunshine. She went first to the bar, where the men were sharpening hoes and sickles in preparation for the summer hay cutting. "The boy Edward?" she asked the tall, red-nosed man. "The small boy who arrived after harvest to help with the threshing. Is he still here?" The man turned and looked at Alice. "Forget this Edward Curly Top. My name is Matt, and I'm 6 times the man he is. Climb up here on this hay bale and give me a warm, sticky kiss." "My hair may be frizzled, but my wits are not," Alice responded. "Save your sticky kisses for your wife or your cow." Alice left the barn and went next to the smithy, where the manor blacksmith and his apprentices were hammering lumps of iron into shoes for horses. "The boy Edward?" she asked. Her answer was rude remarks, laughter, and kissing sounds. From men too ill-tempted or too busy or too tired to care about the questions of a strange girl. "The boy Edward?" Alice asked the kitchen maid skinning a pig in the manor yard, the laundress boiling great kettles of goose fat for soap, the carpenters fashioning a coffin for old Ned who had died that morning. None answered. "Corporate bones," said Alice. "I might as well be asking for the fence." Finally, she found her way to the shed that served as the manor kitchen, and there found the cook, who, judging from the words pouring forth from her mouth, with none to listen, would not be reluctant to talk to Alice. "Please, ma'am," said Alice, who had learned that ma'ams and sirs served her well, even with cooks and stable boys, when asking favors. "Please, ma'am, the boy Edward who came after harvest to help with the threshing, is he still here? Have you seen aught of him?" "Ah, the lamb," the cook cooed, waving her ladle at Alice. "The little lamb, he be here, but too small. He is to be swinging that great heavy flail about, or wrestling with the oxen and plows, and the taunting of the men. so I try to watch over him, the wee duckling, and find simple tasks to do, suited for a small boy. The cook sat down, her face red from the heat and emotion and the boiling and stewing going on about her, took off one great leather shoe and used it to fan her face. She peered closely at Alice. Surely then you be the sister he talked about, for you look less like him and could pass for twins. The cook muttered and crossed herself. You not be twins, she asked Alice, peering closer. I cannot abide twins. No, ma'am, we be not even brother and sister. Ah, never say that, sweet pudding, for you are as alike as two peas, just you are not twins. No, ma'am, not twins, assured Alice again, wondering why twin cows such as Baldford and Bilford should be such a joy and a boon, while twin babies were ill-starred and unlucky. Well then, my little turnip, go find your brother in the hen house behind the barn, where I sent him to gather eggs for a parsley omelet, and bring yourself back here for a dinner of bread and bacon. The cook wiped her wet red face on her skirt, picked a struggling fly from the great pot of soup she was stirring, and began a new conversation with herself, for she found such talking interesting and hardly ever disagreed with what was said. Chapter 15. Edward. The manor was growing quiet, preparing for evening and supper and bed. Alice passed men coming back from the fields, weed hooks and hoes and rakes on their tired shoulders. Dairymaids washing out the churns, stopping every now and then to lick the sweet butter off their fingers. Shepherds bringing in the sheep for tomorrow's washing and shearing, the music of their pipes rising to the wide blue sky and disappearing into the silence. Around the barn in the hen house, she found Edward, egg basket still empty, kneeling before the chickens. So then, he said to the largest and most bad-tempered, you be the king, and you, he pointed to a small hen with speckled feathers, be the queen. For you look motherly and kind, and the rest of us will be knights, and we will pretend we are about to have a great battle with the Scots, but we don't mind, for we are sure to be victorious. At that, Edward looked up and saw Alice watching him. Alice, he cried, leaping to his feet, the better to throw his arms about her waist. Alice, you have not forgot me. Alice remembered her imagining as the boy hugged her, and she smiled. It would be well. Come, Alice, you can be a knight too, and we will march north to the stable. Edward, I sent you here to work so you'd have food and warmth and a place to belong, and instead you're playing knights with the chickens? What be you thinking? She tweaked Edward's nose and pulled a speckled feather from his hair. Come, I'll help you find enough eggs to satisfy the cook, and then we will talk together. Alice, what you be doing at the manor? I came to see how you be, and good thing I did, for it seems you have not the wits of an oaf. Your sister indeed. What are these lies you have been telling the cook? Not really lies, Alice. I just wanted a sister, for all cook's other children have brothers and sisters. Have you come to take me away? Before Alice could reassure him that she was there to rescue him, and all would be well, he continued, You haven't, have you, Alice? For I am sore content here, and mostly have enough to eat, and when cook is cross with me, I sleep with the chickens and pretend. No one chases me away, and even Lord Almouth knows my name. So Alice learned about the sometimes mighty distance between what one imagines and what is. She would not be bringing Edward back with her to make her heart content, but she knew she had not fated him, and she breathed a heavy sigh of sadness, disappointment, and relief. It felt so good that she did it again and again until her sighs turned to sobs and she cried her first crying right there in the hen house, with Edward arming the chickens for battle. Edward patted her shoulders and hands and comforted her as well as a small boy could, and cheered her by wiggling his loose front tooth. On the way back to the kitchen, Edward began a campaign to convince Alice to stay the night, and she agreed, though she knew Janet would scold her for her absence, for she was not ready yet to completely abandon Edward in her rosy imaginings. While they ate their bread and bacon supper, while Alice helped Edward mound up straw in a corner of the kitchen, while she sat by watching for him to go to sleep, all the while Edward talked of life on the manor. He told her of the silken-robed lords and ladies who came for feasts and rode out to hunt and dance like autumn leaves in the candlelit great hall, of the visiting knights who clinked their swords against each other as they practiced in the schoolyard, of the masons who slapped mortar and bricks together to build a great new tower at the corner of the hall that looked to stretch near all the way to heaven. He described the excitement of buying and selling at the great autumn horse fair, the nervous preparations accompanying the arrival of some velvet-shod bishop or priest, and the thrill of watching the baron's men ride out to confront a huge maddened boar who had roamed too close to the village, and he complained that his lot, doing all the smallest tasks, not being allowed to help with the threshing and plowing, being teased for being so little and frail and tied to cook's skirts and fit for nothing but gathering eggs. Finally, as his eyes looked near to closing, he said, "Tell me a story, Alice." "I don't know any stories." "For sure you do. Everyone does." "Well, Janet told me that one night a visiting mayor fell out of bed, hit his head, and thought he was a cat. So he slept all night on the floor watching the mouse holes." "That is no story, Alice. Cook tells me stories. A story should have a hero and brave deeds." "Well, then, once there was a boy who, for all he was so small and puny, was brave enough to do what he must, although he didn't like it, and was sometimes teased. Is that a story?" "Close enough, Alice," and he closed his eyes. When the moon shone through the misty clouds and 2 owls hooted in the manor yard, Edward and Alice slept, each comforted by knowing the other was safe and warm and sheltered not too very far away. The next day, being the day the woolly black-faced sheep were washed before shearing, Alice and Edward ate their bread and beer breakfast down by the river to watch the great event. Edward finished his breakfast first. "I'm still hungry, Alice, and there is nothing about here to eat but grass." "Do you know if grass is good for people to eat?" "Try it." He did. "It'd be good for exercising my teeth and making my mouth taste better, but it tastes like grass, I would say." "Then do not eat it." "What is the best thing you ever ate, Alice?" "Hot soup on a cold day, I think." "Once, long ago, a monk gave me a fig. It was a wonderful thing, Alice, soft and sweet. After that, I had nothing to eat for 3 days but the smell of the figs on my fingers. Are you ever going to finish that bread, Alice?" And Alice gave him her bread, which is what Edward wanted and Alice intended all along. Part of the river had been dammed to form a washing pool. Men stood in the waist-deep water while the hairy shepherds, looking much like sheep themselves, drove all the woolly beasts into the water to have their loose fleece pulled off and then be scrubbed with the strong yellow soap. The river was noisy in the barking of dogs, the bleating of sheep, the calling and cursing of men, and the furious bawling of those lambs separated from their mothers. Edward soon took on the job of matching mothers and babies. He snatched up the bawling lambs and ran from mother to mother until he made up the right pail, whereupon they would knock him out of the way in their hurry to nuzzle each other. As the day grew hotter and river looked cooler, and finally Alice tucked her skirt up into her belt and waded in. The weary men were glad of another pair of hands and soon had Alice helping. First she held the woolly black faces while they were scrubbed, but one old ewe took offense at Alice's handling and, standing up with her front feet on Alice's chest, pushed the girl into the water. Alice, coughing and sputtering, traded jobs with the man who was lathering their backs. Fleeces clean, the sheep swam to the bank and scrambled out the water, nimble as goats and hungry as pigs. By mid-afternoon, they were finished. While Edward and the shepherds drove the sheep to their pens across the field, Alice stretched and wiped her wet hands on her wet skirt. What a wonder, she thought, looking at her hands, how white they were and how soft. The hours of strong soap and sudsy fleece had accomplished what years of cold water never had. Her hands were really clean. There was no dirt between her fingers, around her nails, or ground into the lines on her palms. She sat back against the tree, held her hands up before her, and admired them. How clean they were, how white. Suddenly she sat forward. Was the rest of her, then, that white and clean under all that dirt? Was her face white and clean? Was Will russet right? Was she even pretty under the dirt? There never had been one pretty thing about her, less skinny arms and big feet and dirt. But lately she had been told her hair was black and curly and her eyes big and sad, and she was mayhap even pretty. Alice looked about. The washing was done and the sheep driven to the barn to dry off for tomorrow's shearing. The river was empty but for great chunks of the greasy yellow soap floating here and there. Alice found the spot a bit of rubber from the befouled washing pole, pulled off her clothes, and waded in. She rubbed her body with the yellow soap and a handful of sandy gravel until she tingled. Squatting down until the river reached her Squatting down until the water reached her chin, she washed her hair and watched it float about her until she grew chilled. Alice stood up in the shallow water and looked at herself. Much cleaner, although a bit pink and wrinkled from her long soak. And pretty? Mayhap even that, for she had all her teeth and all her limbs, a face unmarked by pox or witchcraft, and perhaps now more of happiness and hope than of sadness in those big eyes that even the midwife had remarked on. She washed her clothes, put them on, still wet and drippy, and ran for the kitchen to dry a bit before the fire. Too soon it was time to bid Edward goodbye. Be assured I will not be far from here, and I promise to come back for Christmas and Easter and your Saints' Day, and to see when that front tooth grows again. Edward grinned. He had enjoyed the day, done a man's job, and been carried home on the shoulders of a giant of a shepherd called Hal. He was satisfied with his place at the manor, the devotion of the cook, and the friendship of Alice. He suddenly felt not so small. Alice gave him a hug and a smack and felt that tickling in her throat and stinging in her eyes that meant she would cry again. Now she knew how to do it. She went down the path from the manor, stopping every few steps to turn and wave, until finally the path curved and Edward was lost from sight, and all she could see was the way ahead.